to the bottom of Mem Gimel Amid Beis, where Amar Marbrei Ravina. Just to review, we talked about this. The top of the esophagus is called turbitz haveshet. We said it's Machleges Rav and Shmuel. How much of a cut in it invalidates, makes it a treifa. So Rav said a mashu, and Shmuel says it has to be cut roiv. We said, why does Rav say a mashu? Because Rav holds it's still part of the esophagus. You could shech there. If it's part of the esophagus, then it has the din of esophagus, which is a mashu, which is puncture. Shmuel says no, it has to cut roiv because you can't shech there. Okay, so we said a maisa where there was a certain an ox that they started the shechita, they nicked the tarbitz haveshet, and then finished the shechita. So we said manashach it's kosher because according to Rav, you only nicked a little bit, so you only made a puncture, but you can shech there. So according to Rav, it's kosher because you shech there. Shmuel holds you can't shech there, but it didn't cut fully, or cut roiv. So we said manashach it's fine. Then Rava said, I hold it's a problem because I'm going to take the chumrah of Rav and chumrah of Shmuel and put it together. I'm going to take Rav shita that a puncture wound is going to make a treifa, but I'm going to take Shmuel shita that you can't shech there. I'm going to put it together. So because you can't shech there and a puncture wound is a problem, therefore I'm going to make it a treifa. Says the Gemara, an obvious problem. Amar berei de Ravina, mesvina tiyufta klapi sinai de Rava. I have a kasha on those that hate Rava, which is the enemies of Rava. Another way of saying I have a kasha on Rava. The rule is as follows: you could paskin like Beis Hillel, or you can paskin like Beis Shammai. But what you cannot do is take the chumras of both. In other words, you can't just take the chumras of both shitas. The Brisa says lo'ilam hilchas akidiv Beis Hillel. We pass like Beis Hillel. But right to ask Beis Shammai oisa. If you want to follow Beis Shammai, you can, which the Gemara is going to point out in a second. If we pass like Beis Hillel, why are you allowed to follow Beis Shammai? Okay, no. Kediv Beis Hillel oisa. You want to follow Beis Hillel, fine. You want to follow Beis Shammai, fine. Now, if you follow Mekula Beis Shammai, Kula Beis Hillel, if you follow the kulas of both Russia, you're a Russia because you can't just look for kulas. Chumra Beis Shammai, Chumra Beis Hillel, but if you follow the chumras of both, Olav HaKasav Omer, Haksil B'Chayshach Haylech, it's going in darkness. You can't just take the chumras of both. So how could Rava take the chumras of both? Eli Ki Beis Shammai Kibu Kuleim Chumareim, Ki Beis Hillel Kibu Kuleim Chumareim. You either have to follow Beis Shammai for kulas and chumras, or Beis Hillel kulas and chumras. Now, before we address how Rava did this, the Gemara says, "Gufa gash." I don't understand. You start off by saying that we pass like Beis Hillel. But then he said, if you want to follow Beis Shammai, I understand. If we pass like Beis Hillel, and that's the psak, then how could you follow Beis Shammai? So the Gemara says, "Loi kasha kan koydem baskol kan lacha baskol." It's a famous sugya in Bab Metzia that there was a baskol that came out and said halacha follows Beis Hillel. Before the baskol came out, you could choose to follow Beis Shammai. That's when this brisa was written. Then the concept that we pass like Beis Hillel, that's after the baskol. Okay. V'ibay sema af la'achar baskol, or even after the baskol, there are those that say we don't follow baskol. Rav Yeshua da Amar ein mashkichem baskol. Rav Yeshua famously said we don't listen to baskols lo b'shamayim, and therefore, according to Rav Yeshua, I don't care that the baskol. So even after the baskol, you could still follow Beis Shammai if you choose to. Oh, but mikamakam kasha, but l'mais it's a kasha on Rava. How could Rava say that I'm going to take the chumrah of Rav and chumrah of Shmuel? Because again, Rav holds that a puncture wound is a problem, but he holds you could shech there. But he's taking the chumrah of Rav, chumrah of Shmuel. You can't do this. So the Gemara says that's not what Rava holds. Rava does not believe that it's a chumrah Rav, chumrah Shmuel. Rava has a different tradition of Rav. We originally said that Rav sheet is that a puncture wound is a problem because you could shech there. It's part of the esophagus. It's not true. Rava felt that according to Rav, he had a different tradition of what Rav felt. Rav held that a puncture wound is a problem and you're not able to shech there. In other words, Rava has a different shita of what Rav holds, and he's following Rav. It's not putting the... Yeah, based on the way we understand Rav and Shmuel is putting the chumras together. That's not how he understands Rav and Shmuel. He holds that according to Rav, a puncture wound is a problem, and you're not able to shech there. So that's who he follows. Rav Tavus, Kula Karava, really he's following Rav. And he has a different version of what Rav held. The Chiyasar of Dimi, Rabbi Yecheskel Amar, Loi Tatzisu Lahani Bavli, the Ka Yehuda Achi, Mishmei the Rav. Don't listen to the way they explain Rav and Bavel. Hachi Amar Rav, this is what Rav actually said. Veshe Nasbech HaMashir. There's only a limited space in the esophagus you can shecht. The Turbitz Havesha, you can't shecht there. Therefore, he really holds that a puncture wound is going to make a treif, and you're not able to shecht there. So that's the sheet of Rav. Says the Gemara, the Kamar Mashu. So therefore he follows Rav. Now that we mention this, that not the entire esophagus you could shecht, you can't shecht in the turbis haveshes. So where is the limit of where you could shecht in the esophagus? Lo'olam kama, how high up the esophagus can you shecht? Rav Nachman akadei tfisas yad. You have to be able to grab the neck, meaning the top of the neck, the turbis haveshet. You have to give it 3 or 4 fingers. It's unclear, Rashi, 3 or 4 fingers, and then that's the limit. So basically, the top 3 or 4 fingers length of the neck is no good. And how far down could you go? La'ad kama. Now the esophagus goes all the way into the cow's stomach. So the Gemara says, how far could you shecht? Amar nachmar bavua ad kadesh yaser, until it becomes full of hair. Now what does that mean? It's not talking about outside of the animal, it's talking about the inside. The esophagus is very smooth. The food should slide down. All the way when the esophagus attaches to the stomach, the keres, which is the first stomach, it has bumps in the esophagus and becomes like little hairs. That's where you cannot shecht. So in other words, you could shecht all the way mamish down the neck, mamish come out to the stomach, until it meets the first stomach, and then you can't shecht anymore. Is that true? You're able to shecht all the way up to the stomach? Is this true? Didn't Rav say tefach beveshet samach lekeres, that the tefach before the stomach zeu keres panimi, that already has the status of the stomach? Meaning, in other words, you're not able to shecht all the way up to the stomach. You have to stop at tefach before. Amai. But if you tell me I could shecht all the way to the stomach, the tefach before the stomach already has the status of the stomach, so how could you shecht there? So the Gemara gives two answers. Ema, tefach b'keres samach leveshet zeu keres panimi. Maybe it means really you could shecht all the way up to the stomach, because up to the stomach is still the esophagus. I thought it says the tefach up to the stomach is the stomach. No, it means the first tefach of the keres is considered the keres panimi, is considered the smaller part of the keres. In other words, the stomach begins at the beginning of the stomach. It just means the first tefach of the stomach is called the keres panimi. Okay. Or Iba Isema, Kikam Rav b'Torah demasir tvei. Or perhaps Rav was talking about really normally you could shecht up to the stomach, because you have to stop where it gets hairy, and that's the beginning of the stomach. I thought Rav says you have to stop at tefach before. He was talking about an ox, that it becomes very hairy further up, meaning an oxen, apparently the hairy part of the esophagus begins a tefach before the stomach. But generally you can go up to the stomach. Amr of Nachman Amr Shmuel, Turbetz Haveshet Shenitel Kule Melechi Kosher. If the entire Turbetz Haveshet becomes dislocated, so the top of the esophagus becomes dislocated, is kosher. That's a chiddush, because usually a dislocated esophagus is a problem. The Gemara will talk about this in a second. And the truth is, says Shmuel, it's not my shita. It's really a Mishnah, Vitana Tuna. It's really the fact of the Mishnah. What does the Mishnah say? Nita lechi atachten kosher. If the lower jaw is removed, it's kosher. Now that could be read as literally missing the lower jaw. He's saying no, the lower jaw being removed is a dislocation of the esophagus. Says the Gemara, Maskar of Papa ha'ikar simanim. I thought the esophagus becoming dislocated is a treifa. Now this is a kasha both on Shmuel and the Mishnah, because Shmuel backed it up from the Mishnah. So says the Gemara, Rav Papa kash masisa nitalechi atachten kasher. So before we address how this is not like Shmuel, what about the fact that it's a Mishnah? So we seemingly say the Mishnah says nitalechi atachten, which we're interpreting means dislocated pipes, is kosher, but I thought that's a sign of being a treifa. So the Gemara says, the truth is, it's not a Mishnah, it's not a kasha from the Mishnah, because the Mishnah is not talking about dislocated. The Mishnah is not referring to dislocated pipes. The esophagus, if it's dislocated, is taka treifa. I thought the Mishnah says, the Mishnah is referring to missing the lower jawbone. If the lower jawbone is missing, but it's not missing, it's not dislocated the pipe is still there, then it's kosher. But a dislocation of the pipes is a problem. The kasha is Shmuel. Shmuel said that if the Tarbetz Haveshet is dislocated, it's fine. I thought that's one of the Simani Treifa El Shmuel kasha. So the Gemara said, Loite Makule Maruba. The answer is, if it's entirely dislocated, it's a Treifa. Roiv dislocated is kosher. Okay. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Chanam Shmuel, Simanu Shadal Baruban Treifa. But wait a minute, didn't Shmuel himself say that if the majority of the Simanim are dislocated, it's also a Treifa? So it's a contradiction. Is Roiv dislocation a Treifa or not? So the Gemara says, the answer is, Amr of Shisha Breder Avidi, Ha de Ichval Akfule, Hasam de Ifruki Ifruki. So in other words, how is the dislocation happening? If it was dislocated roiv in one place, but the miyut is strong in one location, let's say 70% dislocated, but the 30% is strong in one area, that's kosher. What if it's like torn apart, so it's like 5% here, and then 5% here, and 5% here, 5% here, but it's not together, so it's miyut, and it's not together, that's taka a treifa. Now, the Mishnah said, psuka hagargaris, which is that if, while the esophagus punctured is a treifa, the trachea, only if it's cut 50%. The Gemara speaks it out. Tana, kama psuka hagargaris beruba. Roiv of the esophagus, the trachea being cut, is a psul, is a treifa. The kama ruba. Now, how do you figure out the roiv? Now, this would help a little bit in the art scroll, but basically, you have to cut 50%. That could be 50% of the airspace in the middle, meaning where you sort of ignore the cartilage around and you're just looking at the 50% of the airspace in the middle, and if you cut 50% as a treifa, or does the 50% begin with the cartilage? Now, the reason why this is significant is because the cartilage on the outside is a little bit of like an oval shape. So if you start from the cartilage, you'll get to 50% before you get to 50% of the airspace inside. So if you count from the cartilage on the outside, it's easier to make a treifa, as opposed to just counting on the inside. So says the Gemara Kamaruba, Rav Amar, go to the next page, Rav Uvyav, the majority of the thickness, including the cartilage. V'amri law, Rav Chalola, but some have a different version of Rav, that it's only considering 50% of the airspace inside the trachea. And again, our scroll has a picture, you could try to see the difference. In other words, if you count the trachea wall, the trachea cartilage, then it's going to be harder to make a treifa. So the Gemara says, Hahi psukas hagargeres, the asel kami de Rav. There was an animal with a severed trachea that came in front of Rav. Now, apparently, this animal, if you counted, if you're trying to count the 50% with the esophagus, with the wall, it's a treifa. But I'm sorry, it's a treifa. But if you only count the airspace on the inside, it's not a treifa. So they came in front of Rav. Yosef so Rav started examining using the wall as well. Amr like Rav Kahana Ravasi, meaning that he was about to call it a treifa. So Rav Kahana and Ravasi said to Rav, but you yourself taught us that you don't count the walls, the cartilage of the trachea. You just count the airspace on the inside, so it's not a treifa. So after Rav seemingly said it's treif, and they questioned it, they sent it to Rabbi Chana, and he badka b'rev chalala. He checked just using the airspace in the middle, and he felt that it was kosher. Not only did he paskin that it's kosher, Zavin minei betleiser isteri pshita bisser. He bought some of the meat for it. He wanted to show how confident he was in the kashrus. He actually bought some of the meat. Okay. Now, the Gemara says, here's the issue. From here until the end of the daf, we're going to be dealing with how is Rabbi Bar Chana able to do this? Question number one is, didn't Rav paskin that it's aser? And once a Rav says it's aser, you can't paskin, you can't just shop around for a day. Says the Gemara, Vehechi avirachi, Vatanya, Chacham shetime ein chaver rashel atar. Once a Chacham paskins that it's treif or tameh, you can't say tar, aser chaver rashel ahater. Once a Rav says something's aser, you don't have the right to say that it's mutter. So once Rav said that it's treif, how could Rabbi Chana disagree? So the Gemara says, Shani hacha de Rav li aser mesa. Rav never actually gave up psak. Rav looked at it, he started looking into it, but he never formally gave up psak, and that's why Rabbi Chana was comfortable enough to give a heter. Says the Gemara, okay, question number two. But didn't we have a couple days ago, I think it was last Shabbos, that Yechezkel was praising himself, right? Hashem wanted him to eat bread that was cooked in a disgusting way, and he said, I was never metam in my body. And remember, he says, I didn't have hira and day, and I never mahar after a woman, I never ate pigel, and we said pigel was that I never ate food that there was a shayla on. So here there's clearly a shayla. So how could Rabbi Chana himself eat it? You want to say the regular people, Rabbi Chana is a big Talmid Chacham. How is he eating something that Rav is looking into? And Rav is, declaring that it should be treif. Says the Gemara, V'kivan da'ari b'chacham. But once a Rav was already looking into it, and he obviously felt that it's aser. Now, he may not have gave a formal psak. He never gave an official ruling, but he clearly felt that it's a problem. So how could Rabbi Chana eat it? V'haksiv, doesn't it say by Yechezkel, V'omer Hashem Elikim. Whoa, Hashem, my God, I was never metama in my body. I never ate nevelu treifa, pigel, and I never ate pigel. What does this mean? I was never metama in my body. I never thought about women. I never ate an animal that was dying. I never shechted an animal before it's dying. That was last Shabbos. I never ate something that was a shaylon. Or according to this version, it's I never ate food that they didn't separate manas kuna. But the point is, according to the first version, I never ate food that there was a shaylon. There's clearly a shaylon on this. How could Rabbi Chana eat it? So the Gemara says, this concept of not eating something there's a shayla is only for something that there's a shayla based on a svara. If you have something that it's not clear cut mutter or aser, it's just based on like hashara, based on like estimation, shikaladas. One Rab says aser, one Rab says mutter. Don't eat it because then it's takashayla. Over here, it's a metzias. Rabbi Chana felt ugmuri samach. He relied on a tradition that the majority to make the esophagus, to make the trachea treif, is not counting the trachea walls. That was a tradition that he had. So from his perspective, it's binary. It's not a shikla das. It's not a shara. It's 100% mutter, and therefore he was able to eat it. Now the Gemara says the last question: doesn't it look bad that he's buying meat from something he gave a heter for? People will think that he got a discount, right? Let's say the cost of meat is $5 a pound. All of a sudden he's buying the meat. Mistama, he's getting a discount. Or people will think he's getting a discount. And they'll think that he gave up psak only in order to give a discount. Says the Gemara, it's bad optics. Titania, Donis Hadin. If one makes a case, V'zika v'chayiv, V'tima v'tihir, Asa v'hitter, he gives up psak. The truth is, you're technically allowed to buy the item after you say that it's kosher. But the Chacham say, avoid something that makes that looks suspicious. So over here, if he's getting meat, and we're assuming there's not a set price for meat, it's all just based on, it's all based on, it's not based on weight, it's just based on $10 a slab, whatever it is. So then people will think that he got a discount. So the Gemara says, you're right. If the meat was given by appraisal, then yes, it's not good because people are going to think that he got a good deal because he gave up psak. Over here, he's paying by the weight. If you're paying by the weight, then Rabbi Chana can buy meat anywhere for $5 a pound. So he gets this meat. What does he gain? He's still spending the same $5. He's not getting a deal. It's a set price based on the weight. So that's it. Says the Gemara, like similarly, Kihada Rava Share Treifasa V'Zav Mene Bisser. Rava once paskined about a meat that it was treif. That it was not treif, and he bought it. Mamish like this. Amrli Basar of Chizah, his wife, the daughter of Chizah, said to him, Abba Shari Buchra V'Zav Mene Bisser. My father, when he was mater a bechar is allowed to be eaten nowadays as long as it has a mum. So he checked the mum, and he said that it's kosher to be eaten by a kayan, but he refused to buy the meat. He refused to buy the meat because he thought it was a bad optic. So why are you doing this? So Amrullah Rabbi responded to his wife, Hani Mili Bukhar. Yeah, that's because of Bukhar. One of the rules of a Bukhar is that even when it's allowed to be eaten, you're not allowed to weigh it out in the street. It's considered bizayon. So it has to be bought by appraisal. Anytime you're dealing with appraisal, you can't buy it because it looks bad. People are going to think you got a good deal. But something that's paid for by the weight, it's paid for by the weight. So what deal am I getting? What's the only thing you could be maybe getting me a good deal on? I'm paying for the right, it's a set price, it's market price. The only thing you could say is maybe I'm getting the best cut of the meat. But the truth is I'm getting a filet mignon. You can go to the store and buy a filet mignon. I can buy from other stores. The Gemara says, maybe you're getting the prime cut. I could always go to any store and get the prime cut. I'm gaining nothing from this relationship, and therefore there's no bad optic. Just to finish up the daf, Amr of Chizda, Ezu Talmud Chacham. What's a Talmud Chacham? It's a haraya treifel atzmai. That's someone who has an animal of his own animal. That's a shaila and treifa, and he paskins that it's treif. So that's a Talmud Chacham. I mean, there's makom to be mekel, but he's machmer on himself. That's a Talmud Chacham. Similarly, Amr of Chizda, Ezu Sainim Atanas Yichya. Who's someone who hates getting gifts? Someone who's willing to treif up his own paskin, that his own animals treif, even when there's makom to be megol, he's machmer. That's a person who clearly has enough bitachon that he's not going to rely on getting gifts from people. Anyone who learns Torah and examines the questions of treifa for himself and rules it aser, and is meshamish tamid chachamim, all of a kasavaymer. Such a person, the pasuk says, ki yagia kapecha ki soichal ashecha v'toivlach. He eats the hands of his own labor, happy how he's so happy, and he'll have a good happy life. Razvid Omar, such a person, zoichav nechal shnei lamis. He'll get both worlds, olam haza, olam haba, ashecha b'olam hazeh, v'toivlach olam haba. Rav Elazar ki have meshajulim bein nasiya midi. When they would try to send gifts from the Bein Nasi to Rav Elazar, he refused them. Similarly, when they would invite him to dinner, he refused to go. He says, don't you want me to live? And it says, you'll only get arichas yamim if you hate gifts, so I don't want to take your gifts. Just to finish up, Rav Zera ki mishadr leiloi shakal. Rav Zera refused gifts for the same reason. But when he was invited to meals, he would go. I thought you're not supposed to take a free meal. Amar, he says, he says, I'm not giving them a meal. They're gaining because all of a sudden I'm going there. It's more chush of a meal, so I'm not giving them anything. I'm not gaining free stuff. I'm giving them something. I'm giving them the experience of having me, and therefore he even feels a problem.